Hi there. I wanted to make this video because I'm concerned about the rapid development and deployment of the so-called smart cities, 5, 10, 15-minute cities, and C40 cities. They're generally one and the same, but with a few differences, some elements of which can already be seen in various cities across our world, like the ULEZ in the UK, for example. There are many reports of the same sort of proposed plans, the most well-known being Agenda 2030. There's also the Paris Agreement, Deadline 2020, etc. The one I'd like to look into is the future of urban consumption in a 1.5 degrees Celsius world, C40 Cities Headline Report, or as I prefer to call it, the herding of the population into destitution in a 1.5 degrees Celsius world. This report is brought to you by AREP Group, who are a World Economic Forum partner. The World Economic Forum are the very same creeps who enforced ridiculous COVID measures. If you have a look at the funders and partners on the C40 website, you might be surprised, or perhaps not. But some of the funders are, for example, IKEA or L'Oreal, as in the cosmetics. Do have a look at either page 55 of the report or online on the C40's website, and you'll be able to see what cities are involved in this study. It's mostly the major cities, but do have a look if you're close by any of them. So in this report, essentially what they're trying to convince us of is limiting global heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius and to mitigate climate change, basically. They're considering the greenhouse gas emissions from urban consumption of building materials, food, clothing, private transport, electronics, appliances, and private aviation, which are the categories that we'll be looking into as well. Please allow me to include here a disclaimer before we get into the review of the report. I am not denying that humans affect the earth, that our actions in regards to mono and aggressive agriculture, fracking, the quarrying of precious metals, stones, and other materials, overfishing, the forestry industry, or rather the deforestation industry, improper disposal and or reuse of current materials and products, and the rest of all industries since the 20th century, do have and will continue to have ramifications for the health and well-being of the planet and all who dwell upon and within her. Over the immensely long and turbulent history of the Earth, there have been climatic events of magnitudes greater than we have ever experienced in our lifetime. The climate, temperature, flora and fauna, civilizations have all fluctuated, risen, and fallen due to these dramatic changes. The climate ebbed and flowed, and it's no different now. The temperature of the Earth has been steadily increasing and decreasing by a couple of degrees for thousands and thousands of years. To claim that suddenly for the past 120 plus years, humans are the only cause for climate change is completely contradictory to the overwhelming body of evidence that has been gathered over the decades. This is taken from the IPCC website. They say, human activities are estimated to have caused approximately 1 degree Celsius of global warming above pre-industrial levels with a likely range of 0.8 to 1.2. Global warming is likely to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius between 2030 and 2052 if it continues to increase at the current rate. High confidence. What they aren't mentioning here is, like I said, the 1,000-year-long processes the Earth goes through, and that the temperature fluctuates by a couple of degrees naturally. What they claim to be human-induced climate change is nothing more than what is a naturally occurring process and would be occurring regardless of our presence on Earth. We must also remember that the Earth is dynamic, living, and ever-changing. One must also be open-minded and willing to accept the truth about geoengineering, which is catastrophically damaging the planet, much more than just the pollution of cars, your buying habits, or cow flatulence. For more information on geoengineering, please have a look at the following two websites. The first one is geoengineeringwatch.org, and there's a really interesting documentary titled The Dimming. It's very, very, very fascinating. This website has a lot of really interesting information, and a lot of really nice materials that are downloadable. You can print them up and spread the word. And also ilanafreeland.com. She has some great information as well on geoengineered transhumanism, directed energy weapons, Morgellons, MKUltra, and under her videos section, I highly recommend that you watch all of them, but do start with Chemtrails, HARP, and Geoengineering with Ilana Freeland. I understand that everyone wants quick and easy answers. Unfortunately, we live in an era of speed and convenience rather than patience and research, but there's nothing about this that can be said within a mere 5 minutes. You might be wondering, where is the evidence of past climate change? Well, now climate change is a politicized movement, meaning any real scientific studies have been all but discarded from the mainstream media, and it takes quite some time finding anything credible online, but it is there. For the same reason that this evidence is not discussed in the media, it's also not discussed in schools or universities. The lie that humans are the only reason for climate change has to continue, for profits to continue, and plans to continue as well. So to write this headline report based on lies is repugnant, as you'll come to understand as we go through this report. If you type in human-induced climate change into any search browser, and if you get the summarizer like I have here, the middle part is really quite funny. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, Fifth Assessment Report states that human emissions and activities have caused around 100% of the warming observed since 1950. Are you kidding me? 100%? It's completely our fault? Please, what a joke. Please do have a look at the clintel.org website for the World Climate Declaration, and you can get the declaration for free. There's over 1,609 signatories. It basically tells you that there is no climate emergency, and it'll tell you why. I urge you to find your own information and do your own research before dismissing any information given to you. But if you're completely new to the topic and other alternative viewpoints, please do have a look at the links in the description below. After watching and or reading all of the links, you might in fact reach the same conclusions as I have and as others have. Here are the main takeaways of this report. The main ones that we need to look at are, number one, the new way of measuring the climate footprint is with urban consumption as opposed to production. If you look on page 5 of the report, it will tell you consumption-based greenhouse gas accounting is an alternative to the production-based approach to measuring city greenhouse gas emissions. It focuses on the consumption of goods and services by residents of a city rather than the emission source category, so the production. For the purposes of the report, the PAS 2070 methodology was adopted. Well, if you want to know what's in this report, it's £92 sterling. This is a link if for whatever reason you're curious to read it. For this video, I did not purchase it, and I will not be purchasing it because it's £92 sterling. So let's go back. Number 2, cities, the larger cities, I would imagine, represent, according to their numbers, which are questionable, 10% of the consumption-based emissions. Supposedly, number 3, the emissions measured by what is consumed will double by 2050. If they doubled by 2050, that means production also doubles. Number 4, emissions from consumption in high-income cities must decrease by 2/3. At the same time, developing economies need to also adopt sustainable consumption, meaning it'll affect everybody. And number 6, these are the categories that we'll be looking at. They want everything reduced by ridiculous numbers. Also, I'd like to mention here, do you notice how they're blaming you for climate change? Instead of looking at the industries that produce things that we consume, they're telling you that it's your fault for consuming them, when also they market it to you so that you do consume them. They're totally gaslighting you. They'll never fault themselves for their own actions. How is any of this going to work, you ask? Well, they're going to want to change our behavior. Let's look at the right arrow. Signs of broad behavioral change will support low-carbon corporate and political action. How? Carbon pricing. Carbon pricing, this is the first arrow at the top, carbon pricing sends a price signal to consumers by making high-carbon goods more expensive, thereby triggering a positive behavior change towards a low-carbon alternative. Let's say, for example, you want to buy your family some really beautiful organic vegetables. Well, you won't be able to. Why? Because they're going to be marketed as high carbon, whether true or not, and also more expensive. Everything processed and fake will be less expensive, and it'll also be marketed as lower carbon producing, whether true or not. This is the second arrow down. Carbon pricing mechanisms are scalable at local, national, and multinational levels and allow carbon reductions to occur where they are most cost effective. This basically means international. If we wanted to have a look at their citations, let's see what happens. This link is taken from page 14 of the report. Oh, well, look at that. When I first accessed this link, it would have taken me to this page. And when I clicked on download a media pack with case studies, that's when I saw the 404 not found page. But now, as you can see, the 404 not found page is what comes up first. So I started making this video back in July, on July 29th, or maybe the day before. But the picture, the screenshot that you see here, I took on July 29th, 2023, and as well as the media pack URL link. When I went to the 404 not found page, I took a screenshot of it as well on the same day. So if you want to know where they get their data, they get it from themselves, the IPCC, and the World Economic Forum, which tells you everything you need to know. You'll notice graphs, plots, numbers, words in bold, but again, no citations. And if you look at the colors chosen, they incite a feeling of urgency or danger. So you know that they're not unfamiliar with color theory. Let's get into it. These are the 6 categories: infrastructure, food, clothing, textiles, private transport, private aviation, electronics, and appliances. Let's remember who is pushing for this. So it's the World Economic Forum. And if we combine all elements together into a single context, you'll see just why this report is very troublesome. Infrastructure. They want to reduce the amount of steel and cement, reduce the demand for new buildings. Again, remember, reducing demand is changing a behavior. 75% of residential and commercial buildings are timber, replacing cement with low carbon alternatives, and reusing building components. Let's have a look at Carbicrete. They are a company who specialize in low carbon cement. Now, I'm not saying that the technology of carbocrete is not innovative. However, my main issue with all of this is the elimination of CO2, as CO2 allows photosynthesis to occur in all plants, terrestrial and oceanic. These plants consume CO2 and release oxygen for us to breathe. We don't need to remove CO2 from the atmosphere because we currently have very low levels. We are at around 406 parts per million. If we go below 180, there will be no life left on this planet, as evidenced by previous similar occurrences in our planet's history. Something else that we should be looking at is steel slag. What is steel slag? Steel slag is a byproduct of the production of steel. It's produced during the separation of the molten steel from impurities in steel-making furnaces. Well, if, according to the C40 report, steel and cement industries will be reduced, where will carbocrete and other companies get their steel slag? They'll have to find it somewhere else, or another byproduct to create their cement. The main issue I have, as I said, is that it eliminates CO2 from the atmosphere. So no trees, no us. It's pretty simple. If these new low-carbon building materials are durable, which has yet to be proven by any actual prolonged trial and error periods, they would be combined with old building components, which might already be failing. So whatever problems you think you have now with plumbing, your windows, your roof, what have you, those will likely be superseded by worsening building issues. Reducing demand. Well, as we saw, it's a behavior change. So what does it imply? How do we force people to change their buying habits? It implies that our behavior will be reprogrammed into accepting less suitable living arrangements, all for the sake of climate change. Your building will be slowly falling apart, all costs will have risen sharply, but it'll be okay because you're being helpful towards the fight for climate change. Material switching. While residential and commerce or commercial buildings are to be made with wood, according to the climate change narrative, aren't we trying to eliminate CO2, which can effectively be done with trees that do it naturally? By destroying trees to build structures, isn't that counterproductive to the climate change scheme? Similar to this is using those compostable, reusable wooden spoons and forks that can be found in some places, for example in the UK. Or, even worse, Bill Gates says he wants to cut down 70 million trees for the sake of climate change. Does this make any sense at all? No, it doesn't. Also, aren't we trying to reduce consumption in cities? Why would they want to build more commercial buildings when we're supposed to be purchasing less? Next is food. This section is probably the most shocking that I've read. The progressive targets are nothing to laugh at, but the ambitious targets are something else entirely. As we all very well know, diseases are caused by a multitude of factors. Pharmaceuticals, toxins in the environment, the quality, cleanliness, and amount of water we drink, the quality, cleanliness of food that we eat, the quality and amount of sleep we get, the quality and amount of exercise, and proximity and duration in nature. If one drinks alcohol, doing so responsibly and with moderation, whether a person smokes or not, one's consumption of other dangerous drugs, the amount of stress one suffers, emotional trauma, mental trauma, physical trauma, and one's proximity and duration sitting in 5G and Wi-Fi. And of course, we can't forget about vaccines. Health does not mean eating less food. Health means eating better quality food. I highly recommend reading this book, Nourishing Traditions, the cookbook that challenges politically correct nutrition and the Diet Dictocrats by Sally Fallon Morel. It's wonderful, it's packed with information and amazing recipes. Please do give it a chance. I also recommend her other books. Let's just go back here and I'll show you. For example, if you're pregnant or if you have a child, this is a very, very lovely book as well. Nurturing Traditions, Book of Baby and Child Care. Anyway, there's a lot of them. There's broth, there's fats, paleo ancestral, there's just a cookbook for kids. Incredible stuff. And of course, the contagion myth, which is also very, very interesting. Also, check out her blog and do look at her resources. She has posted some amazing presentations, which are all quite fascinating, and I highly recommend them as well. How are we supposed to maintain 2,500 calories per person per day as they recommend? Are we supposed to do that with lab-grown synthetic meat, cheese, pharma veggies, and oat water? The next category is reducing household waste. That sounds pretty nice, especially if one can use the kitchen waste to compost it and use it in one's garden for perpetual free food. They don't, however, mention human waste. Are we to reduce this too? Well, I suppose if we're eating less, we'll also be going to the washroom less. Is that what they call a win-win situation? There are many articles online about backyard urban gardens still being a topic of contention for some people. Although, I don't think this will be a problem because we'll probably have plants growing on our buildings anyway due to poor infrastructure, like the first category, because they'll be poorly built and nature will easily overtake them. But also because these buildings are now being touted as the future of eco-friendly buildings.
The Santolaya is a high-end multifamily residential building in the Colombian capital of Bogotá with a wonderful view of the Eastern Hills. In 2013, architects Exacta Proyecto Total approached Groncol, a vertical garden and green roof design build firm, with the idea of having the building entirely covered with plants. Due to Groncol's experience using Paisaísmo Urbano's F+P hydroponic system, they were hired to design and construct one of the world's largest vertical gardens at about 33,550 square feet. Completed in December 2015, the project took a total of 8 months of planning and 8 months of construction to build the green wall 9 stories above ground and 2 stories underground. The architect's intent was to produce a uniform green tone and plant volume, and naturalized plants in the massive F+P green wall include Hebe mini, asparagus fern, rosemary, vincas, and spathiphyllum, among others. In total, about 115,000 plants. Designing irrigation, water recycling systems, and plant selection were some of the biggest challenges. The vertical garden was constructed over a large metallic structure designed specifically for the project. 42 irrigation systems are used for the living wall, which uses water from the apartment's showers for irrigation. The plant coverage helps reduce the urban heat island effect, and Groncol says 115,000 plants equal a carbon footprint compensation for 700 people. 3,000 square meters of vegetation provide oxygen for 3,000 people. And the very large green wall offers the equivalent of air cleansing for the PMM emissions of 745 cars. The end result is the highly successful establishment of one of the most beautiful and largest vertical gardens in the world. The lush Santolaya green wall is a reminder that we should not live only in a concrete-covered city. We should be constantly relating with nature instead. For more information about this project and many more, explore the International Green Roof and Green Wall Projects database at greenroofs.com.
While these buildings are very pretty to look at, only by merit of nature growing on them, as the narrator said in the video for Santolaya, these are all high-end units. I just have to wonder how much these will cost and who will be able to afford living in an eco building. One way to look at this, the positive way I suppose, is that we'll be getting more oxygen thanks to the plants, if they can even survive in a low CO2 environment. But the other way to look at it is that for those who expect a wall or a roof to shelter them from the wind, the sun, a blizzard, even an extreme downpour of rain, they'll be sorely disappointed and cold and wet. Recall the first category, infrastructure, and its reduction of steel and cement, more use of wood, reuse of old buildings, How appealing can the globalists make dystopia? The globalists are trying to sell you on the idea of a utopian green city. Like this one, for example. This is called Semaphore. It's proposed by a man named Vincent Calbeau. Of course, the image looks beautiful. Everything looks comfortable, eco-friendly. There aren't any signs of inequality or poverty. But I think this is far from reality. I think it's more likely that the globalists want us to live in cities like that of the opening scene of New York in I Am Legend.
Here's Karen at the health desk.
The world of medicine has seen its share of miracle cures, from the polio vaccine to heart transplants, but all past achievements may pale in comparison to the work of Dr. Alice Crippen. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Not at all.
So, Dr. Crippen, give it to me in a nutshell.
Well, the premise is quite simple. Take something designed by nature and reprogram it to make it work for the body rather than against it.
You're talking about a virus.
Indeed, yes, in this case, the measles virus, which has been engineered at a genetic level to be helpful rather than harmful. And I find the best way to describe it is if you can imagine your body as a highway and you picture the virus as a very fast car being driven by a very bad man, imagine the damage that car could cause. But then if you replace that man with a cop, the picture changes, and that's essentially what we've done.
How many people have you treated so far?
Well, we've had 10,009 clinical trials in humans so far.
And how many are cancer-free?
10,009.
So you have actually cured cancer?
Yes. Yes, we have.
Well, you get the idea. Why is everyone given this vaccine? Did everyone have cancer? Why is New York a ghost town? And then 3 years later, the damage is done. How many people have died since the COVID jab rollout? Supply chain waste. They want to avoid supply chain waste. Ideally, that means that critical energy sources and transportation of food and household waste will be more efficient and timely. Well, maybe that means something more along the lines of replacing everything with AI, or even removing most of the supply chain. That includes you. Think of the previous categories and the main idea of the reduction of everything. Fewer transports, fewer produce and food products, helping fewer people. This includes the final products associated with the primary materials and manufacturing and ingredients. I hope at this point you're starting to see an interconnected message. Let's keep going. Clothing and textiles. I'm definitely a proponent of reusing fabric and other materials we already have in circulation, using natural fabrics and not polyesters or PVC, changing and improving methods of growing the materials needed for fabric, paying people way more, making fabrics and clothing domestically, and doing away with other current despicable fashion practices. However, this report doesn't mention any of this. Ethics or morals do not concern the globalists. Consider for a moment the following. A family of 3 or more kids, perhaps 2 or more adults, elderly included. What if someone's clothing is irreparably torn? The child grows up faster than expected and needs new shoes, gym outfit, or a sport uniform? What if you need to replace the linens on your bed and your family's mattress? Consider everything you own that is made of a textile. Now imagine it irreplaceable. Now imagine it gone. There are innumerable scenarios here where one would need a replacement of something. But, as you can see, you've already exhausted your very small quota for the year, so you're out of luck. You can either have 8 new clothing items per person per year, or 3, which is their ambitious target. Now imagine everyone in this same scenario. What happens when a large population of desperate people are needing something? Now there's nowhere to get it except the neighbor's house. Maybe. Torn clothing will no longer be a fashion choice or statement. So let's combine these first categories together and see what we get. Not only is everyone living in dilapidated buildings, but they're hungry, malnourished, unhappy, wearing the same clothing for weeks, months, and they're unable to provide their families with anything they need. Doesn't this sound more and more like enforced poverty? The next section is private transportation. They want to reduce the amount of ownership. Now, whether they reach their progressive goal or their ambitious goal, it doesn't make much of a difference, and here's why. The lifetimes of the vehicles are the key points here. They are basically saying that after between 20 and 50 years from now, no one will have a private vehicle, and the one we own is our last. How will they take away your vehicle? By changing your behavior into buying one that is less suitable for you, like the fire hazard EVs, by also convincing you that it's the right thing to do for mitigating climate change. Let's say they reach their progressive goal of 190 vehicles per 1,000 people. And those vehicles, those 190 per 1,000, each have a 20-year lifetime for the body of the vehicle. That means that most people will not have a private vehicle, thus enabling their goal of 0 vehicles to be achievable, their ambitious target. How they plan on extending the lifetime for the body of the vehicle is unsure, because they also want to reduce the use of metal and plastics. So how can they have a stronger vehicle with less strong and less materials in the vehicle itself? They don't mention what the replacement materials will be. What this means is the vehicles in the progressive target range are likely going to be the last vehicles on the road. And should someone be able to purchase one of the newer ones, it will also be their last vehicle, because eventually they don't want any vehicles at all. Any mode of transportation that allows freedom will be prohibited. The next section is private aviation. Here they want to reduce the number of flights, so they want everyone to have one short-haul return flight every 2 or 3 years per person. That definitely reduces the amount of places one can visit. A short-haul flight is anywhere that takes less than 3 hours. So it is less than 1,500 kilometers. What if during these 2 or 3 years there's a family event, like a funeral, a marriage, a birthday, and it's more than a short-haul return flight? You won't be able to go. What if someone is in the hospital and you need to see them, and they're really far away? Again, you won't be able to go. What if there's an emergency, another kind of emergency, like, I don't know, escaping a tyrannical globalist agenda in the form of the next lockdown, a fake pandemic part 2, a cyber attack, or the last card false flag alien invasion? Sorry, not possible to leave. If by some strange miracle you manage to get a flight out somewhere, what then? There's no private vehicles. How are you going to get to your destination? Walk? And this is the last category, electronics and appliances. They have only one target here, and they want a 7-year optimum lifetime of laptops and similar electronic devices. What does this mean? We all know already that planned obsolescence is a big problem with our current devices, forcing us to buy new ones at a ridiculous rate. Not only that, but they market new ones all the time when we don't actually need them. Are they telling us here that we need to take care of our current electronics because after this, if they make new ones, they'll last only 7 years? And what then? Will they make more after 7 years that'll last only another 7 years? Or is this the last batch? And with what materials will they be made of if we're no longer mining metal and using plastics? Who is allowed to purchase these new electronic devices if indeed they're made? Aren't we supposed to be curbing our consumption? And what if in year 3, during these 7 years, the appliances or the devices stop working? Are we to wait 4 years until the next batch is made? Who's going to fix them? I hope you're seeing exactly why this report is problematic. It leaves everything to be desired. We are being made to move to cities through the geoengineering of natural disasters, or forcing people to leave the countryside for work in the city. This dystopian city is the one they want you to live in. The final scenario I'd like for you to imagine is all of the above categories, compounding the current issues we already face in cities all over the world. This lack of everything is going to incite and invite a plethora of problems. Think theft and violence are bad now? And add to this the COVID narrative and other anti-human measures. This has already begun all over the world, and without anyone's consent. Remember carbon pricing from before? I don't remember agreeing to that. Another question I'd like to ask is if any of the above categories will apply to the ultra-rich, and even the globalists themselves. But I think we can all agree here that the answer is no. Even those with a healthy amount of capital will find themselves entangled in this mess. No one will be spared. So why are low-life swamp creatures like Bill Gates buying huge swaths of land? Has he suddenly decided to have a shred of humanity and take up farming to help finally resolve world starvation, which is a manufactured, convoluted issue that doesn't need to persist? Or did he suddenly realize he just wants to live among the trees, birds, bees, and butterflies that are slowly being decimated to further reduce our crops because without pollinators like them, we have no food or plants? Has he suddenly become a billionaire hippie? I don't think so. He owns 270,000 acres of agricultural land in the United States. That's about 18 states combined. I think we also cannot forget the favorite mantra of the World Economic Forum, which is that you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. So there you have it. A report based on lies about the climate to scare you into compliance with graphs, charts, big red lettering, numbers, and language that frighten you into submission. In summary, this is a typical problem, reaction, solution situation, whereby the globalists are pushing the human-induced climate change narrative, basically blaming you when it's a natural process, by creating, geoengineering natural disasters through the use of certain volatile compounds and chemicals in the atmosphere, chemtrails, long-range acoustic devices like sound weapons, earthquake, tectonic weapons, so-called wildfires, and etc., to attempt to prove the climate change narrative. Consider the Build Back Better scheme. People who believe the narrative then take it upon themselves to fight, thereby asking other citizens, governments, corporations, organizations, charities, which are really criminal front organizations, to then help and fight too, which then promotes and continues the political climate change movement between generations. Recall the various name changes: acid rain, then global warming, then climate change, and now it's human-induced climate change. Those organizations who were called to help then create new laws and regulations to force everyone else into compliance with the narrative. Think carbon pricing and behavioral change. The acceptance by the general public of these laws and regulations validates the belief in the narrative and allows for everyone to feel as though they're part of something bigger than themselves, basically the heroes of the earth. So when programs like Build Back Better or 5, 10, 15-minute cities, smart cities, or C40 cities are proposed, Those same narrative believers are highly likely to approve and will not be able to understand the real motives behind such programs. If it's easier to understand, look at the problem reaction solution in reverse. So what happens is the globalists want a certain outcome. And so this outcome is actually the solution. So what they do is they create a problem because that's the only way to get to their solution. And so they expect a certain reaction from the public. They know how people will react. And then that reaction allows them to step in with that solution that they wanted in the first place. What is it that they always say? That they find opportunity in a crisis? Well, they create the crisis because it gives them the opportunity to create what they want in the end. None of what I described in this video has to come to pass. It never has to be our reality. We just need to keep talking about this, about the stupid globalists and their stupid agendas. We have to give love by also giving information that can save lives, expand minds, and open hearts. We can make this place a paradise without parasites. And remember, never comply and never surrender.